Was the Bible copied from ancient texts by Billy Carson?
And I thought, this one book that I've been reading is not the only end-all and be-all source of information. As a matter of fact, a lot of the information in here was copied from other books and tablets and texts from all around the world. And that's what I intend to do across this series. I'm going to call it a mini series that I'm going to do on ancient text of the Bible coming from ancient texts, being copied from ancient texts. That's going to take me through quite a few books and scriptures and tablets. Tonight, we're going to look at some of the Enuma Elish. We're going to look at the Epic of Gilgamesh. And we're also going to look at the debates, which is another Sumerian tablet that very few people know about, which talks about the story of Cain and Abel. That's about all we'll have time for tonight, because like I said, I can make this into a 5 or 6 hour show, but we're going to break it up into pieces. That's how we're going to do it. All right. Pretty interesting stuff tonight. And I want to thank everyone for taking their time to come on here. And then I have a very special announcement, because I have a very special impromptu podcast that I'll be doing tomorrow night. And you're not going to want to miss this one. Matter of fact, I'm going to show you. I'll wait. Let me put it up at the end. The cover, the thumbnail cover for this one, it's going to be dynamic. It's going to be something sensational, I should say. All right. Very sensational. So with that being said, let's start talking about the biblical text. First of all, we're talking about the civilization that lived in Mesopotamia. Now, Mesopotamia is an ancient region which used to, in ancient time, encompass part of Africa. Now, due to the modern era and the redrawing of boundaries, you see where Africa starts, but Africa extended up into the Middle East in that time frame. As a matter of fact, in the Sumerian Tablets, they call some of the first peoples there the black-faced people. And these people were part of the African continent. Over time, as Mesopotamia became Iraq and Iran and the Middle East, and there's a whole story behind that, because we know that the Arabs invaded that region. They attacked, they killed a lot of people in order to subdue the land and subdue the area, including Egyptians. And this is not anything that I'm doing to agitate anybody. It's just a fact. They teach you this when you go to Egypt. I mean, the story is right there in Coptic Cairo. The Arabs came in and they slaughtered millions upon millions of Egyptians, and the rest who survived, they forced them to speak Arabic, which is why today most Egyptians have no clue how to speak Egyptian, and they also have no clue what their hieroglyphs actually say. They just started teaching hieroglyphs again in school in Egypt about 3 years ago. Okay, so there's generations of Egyptians that can't even read hieroglyphs. Incredible stuff. No matter what you look at, when you look at religion, it always tends to seem like there are just so many situations where there's people being slaughtered to force a particular belief system on a group of people. It never seems to be truly done out of love. Okay? It never seems to be truly done out of love. Thanks again. And so, it's just pretty interesting, because when you look at the life of a person that's heavily into religion, believing in the one God system, and there's a couple of different religions there, not just Christianity. Primarily, they all have the same end belief that if you don't believe in this deity, the end result for you will be death, permanent death and suffering, but not death that you would disappear and never come back. Death that you are dead in the body, in the physical form, but eternal life of suffering going on and on and on. Some of these cultures believe that, if they die in the flesh by committing these acts of, these egregious acts, I should say, like, suicide bombings and things like that, that they believe that they're going to go to an afterlife in a paradise, and they're going to get a special gift from Allah, and they're going to be given virgins. Usually it's about 13 virgins is the belief system. right? 13 virgins. And, when I first heard that, I was asking myself a question like, thank you, Latoya Ray. I was asking myself a question like, why would I want 13 virgins to commit suicide and kill people and do these acts in the name of Allah, right? These egregious acts against other people on the planet, flesh and blood people. Why in the world would I want 13 virgins? Because if I'm going to be living eternally and living forever, as these people seem to believe, wouldn't I want unlimited virgins? What happens when I run through the 13? I mean, can I get the unlimited virgin package if I'm going to kill myself with a bomb? These are the things that make me think. I just have to ask these questions to myself sometimes when I'm sitting around. I just, think about these things. It just makes me, beg to ask the question like, 13 virgins, but I'm going to live eternally and I can only get 13? Nobody thought to ask for the unlimited package? I'm just asking. I'm asking for a friend. Okay, I'm just joking what you got. But you see what I mean? I'm making fun and I'm being funny, but at the same time, I'm showing you when you really begin to analyze some of this stuff, it sounds so crazy. Like there's no basic logic behind it. If you look at the other part of the religion, right? On the flip side, Christianity, I've got to be lucky because at the right exact time, I've got to ask for that last forgiveness from Jesus so I can make it into heaven. I got to time it right before I die. Like I just got to time it right before my last heartbeat and my last breath. I got to time it just right so I can get that last forgiveness out. Because if I miss that last forgiveness, I'm not going to make it to heaven. And then guess what's going to happen? I'm going to perish and suffer for all eternity in a lake of fire. A lake of fire. And what that tells me a lot about Christianity and me talking to a lot of Christians and knowing the Bible inside and out, upside down, better than 99% of the pastors that are out there, I become to realize something very interesting. The majority of people, not all, listen to me, not all, but the majority of people that are Christians are only Christians for self-preservation. They're only caring about one thing and one thing only. I had a pastor tell me this. I'm doing this just in case it's right, just in case this information is accurate. This is a backup plan so I don't burn in hell. It's a self-preservation tool. In other words, 99% of the people that are following that religion are only doing it because they're afraid to burn for all eternity in a lake of fire, which was added to the Bible by the Catholic Church, by the way, in the 2nd century. Okay. So it's pretty interesting. Yes, Cash Cow, I'm going to talk about the Pentagon and the report of the mothership. I'm going to do a special pop-up podcast on that. That won't be tonight, but there'll be a special pop-up podcast on that tomorrow. Thank you. And so it's a self-preservation thing. People are actually afraid of dying and suffering for all eternity in this imaginary lake of fire. What I began to realize the more I analyzed ancient texts and tablets and scriptures and cylinder scrolls and papyruses and biblical canonized texts was that heaven and hell is a state of mind. The more ancient sages and wisdom keepers that I went and met all around the world and talked to and sat with in the bushes and everything else, it's all about a state of mind. And that people that believe in the religious texts as being a real heaven and a real hell, and the hell being the biggest fear factor of it all, primarily are operating in fear. And where there's fear, there is no love. So if I'm doing these ritualistic acts on a daily basis and begging this outside source to forgive and save me all the time and trying to time it just right so I don't be cast into this eternal lake of fire and suffering for all eternity and all time's sake, what's really happening is I'm more worried about saving my own skin than really the religion. The religion is just the side thing there that happens to be around. But what's really happening is just in case this thing might be real, I'm going to practice this thing. And I do mean practice. I'm going to do it as if, my heart's really into it. But when you dig down into the deep psyche of it all, the person is just into it for self-preservation. Think about this for a minute. If your God is all-knowing, omniscient, omnipotent, all-loving, never changing, and all these terminologies that they like to tell you. And you understand that as to be a supposed fact, never question it. But then at the same time, you can be, quote unquote, cast into a lake of fire for all eternity for punishment and torment for sins that supposedly, according to that same book and text, you had committed before the foundation of the earth. In other words, you were born a heathen, you were born a sinner, you were born this and born that. You're told that you're this person and that you're that person and you're so evil, and then you're coming out of the womb as this evil entity before you even have a chance to form your very first thoughts, cohesive thoughts. And then as you're growing up, you're told and programmed and just beaten to your head nonstop that you're a bum, you're a loser, you're a sinner, you're nothing, you're worthless, until you get on your knees and grovel. And then you tell me that that's an all-knowing, all-loving God that you're worshiping, when in true reality, it's a big fear factor. And all you're doing is trying to save your own skin by following the rituals and hoping that in the end, it was accurate. And the evidence of this is the fact that you don't do any research. You don't know what I'm about to tell you tonight because you never looked into it. You never dug into the original version of the biblical text and sourced the material and where it came from. You didn't break it down into Aramaic like I did, into the original tongues to figure out what the original text that was converted into some of the testaments were saying. You didn't look at the Torah. You didn't learn Hebrew. I have books here where I study Hebrew text. You didn't break down the Hebrew text to find out where the Torah got its information and then break those down into even more ancient texts to see what the source material was. You just took it hook, line, and sinker and said, you know what, this is what I got to do because everybody told me I had to do it. And if I don't do it, I'm going to suffer for eternity. So this is a big part of why I do what I do. It's about education. It's about awakening. It's about showing people that before you jump headfirst into something and stay with it for the rest of your life, maybe you should take a pause and drop some of that fear and start digging a little bit deeper, just so you can get a better understanding. And after that, if you still feel that that's the thing for you, phenomenal. I have plenty of friends that are Christians, plenty of friends that are Muslims. Hey, and we get along great and we hang out, we do great things together. But at the same time, hey, they know where I stand and I know where they stand. And if they, after having the knowledge and the wisdom, if that's for them, then that's for them. That's phenomenal. But at least give yourself the opportunity to take a look and see more information about what you have literally programmed yourself to believe in, and also your offspring and their offspring and their offspring for future generations. What are you beating into somebody's head? Tonight, we're not going to go deep into a lot of the logistics of it. We're going to be talking about source material. Where did some of this stuff come from? And it's so much that I've got to do it in stages because it's a lot of text, all right? To keep this video safe from demonetization and to keep it running, I'm going to use source material. And that source material primarily is going to be coming from Encyclopedia Britannica. And so for that case, I don't have to worry about demonetization. J.C. Clark says, so do you pray too? I agree with what you say about Christianity, but I'm programmed to pray. Praying is phenomenal. I pray every single day. And that's a great question. See, a lot of people think that I don't believe in God because I don't believe in religion. And the fact of the matter is, and I've said this 1,000 times, but some people are just finding me for the first time, I believe in a creator of the universe, of the multiverse even. Because why? My studies in quantum physics have showed me that there is proof and evidence that we are living inside of a creation, that there is a creator of all, and that this creation is imbued with divine energy. And that divine spark that created everything in the entire multiverse is in every single atom in my body. And because of that, I am divine and the divine is divine. So that means I am God and God is me. We are all God walking in the flesh. As a matter of fact, God is experiencing what it's like to be a human being in the third dimension, walking in the flesh through each and every one of us. Through each and every one of us. There's only one entity. There's only one consciousness. The fact that J.C. Clark maybe somewhere across this planet watching this, and I'm sitting here across the other side of the planet watching this, doesn't mean anything. There's only one person. When I'm talking to JC Clark and you guys, I'm talking to myself. And when JC is talking to other people, he's talking to himself. We are all slightly different expressions of the same one consciousness. Separation is an illusion. Distance is an illusion. It's an illusion of the third dimension. Above the third dimension, distance doesn't exist. Time doesn't exist. The past, present, and future happen all at the same time. And there's oneness there, higher than the third dimension. It's something that we should all aspire to. And so I do pray, and how I pray is like this. When I'm happy about something, number one is I thank. I always give thanks. I don't give thanks and, oh, thank you, Lord, and all that kind of stuff, because the Lord is that's a whole nother podcast. But what I do is I give thanks. I say thank you with pure heart and gratitude and soul from myself to the creator of the universe. And when I am doing things like eating food or a meal, I command that the food be safe and healthy for my body. Now, I'm not going to command over a Hershey's bar. I'm not going to command over biscuits and gravy and collard greens, because I know that's going to give me diabetes. I'm not going to pray over a plate of slop because I'm smart. But if it's food that's good and healthy, I want to command that it's safe. In other words, that there's no salmonella in it, that there's nothing in there that's going to be detrimental to my body, no bacteria that was unforeseen, things like that. When I travel, I command that I arrive at my destination safely, things like that. That's my method of praying, knowing the end and believing in the end before the end. And why can I command it? I command it because the same power of commandment and the same power of control and creation is inside of my body. I have a fractal of the creator living inside of me. And so because of that, I walk in that power. And so I'm a walking prayer, and so are you. Everyone is a walking prayer. What is praying? Praying is looking to cast a spell. A Christian may not want to admit that because they're going to say, oh, that's of the demons and all that kind of stuff. No, when you pray, you're trying to cast a spell. When something goes wrong and you start praying, you're trying to say words outside of your vocal cords to an outside entity, but you're really speaking to the universe, and you're trying to get things to alchemically convert to your favor. It's a spell. You're trying to cast a spell. That's what praying is. But when you pray from a position of weakness, where you're begging, hoping, and wishing, and you're pushing out that low frequency energy into the universe, you're going to get more of that back. And so I pray from a position of power. And my position is thank you, unconditional love, and commanding. If somebody cuts me off in traffic, I don't get angry and start chasing them down and flip them off the middle finger and pulling out a gun and all this kind of stuff. I just say, bless that person. They could be in a bad situation. They could have got a phone call that their kid just got hurt in school. They could be having a medical situation. Their wife could be having a baby at home or something. Or they could just be careless. Bless them. Let them make it to their destination safely. That's how I pray. You see the mindset, you see the difference in thinking there. It's a totally different way of thinking, a totally different way of seeing the world. It's a totally different way of living through spirituality. Spirituality. If you ever seen that meme where you have a fish bowl and you have a fish inside of the fish bowl and the fish bowl's in the ocean, that's religion. Outside of the fish bowl, swimming around the free ocean is the fish. That's spirituality. And so we have to come to that point where we recognize there's a difference. When you hear the word religion, that's not spirituality. Two separate things. I'm a spiritual person. I'm not a religious person. And I understand now, through many years of dedicated research and traveling the world and studying, that the power, the true power to help and bless people in this world, and the true power to make a true difference and higher levels of consciousness availability, is only through spirituality. Because religion puts you in a box, and the box has a cap on it, and it only lets you go to the top of that box. And if you get to the top of that box, you're going to hit your head. After hitting your head so many times, you don't even jump to the top of the box anymore. You just stay down here. And once that happens, you pass it on from generation to generation. And then we have generations and generations of people over eons that are mentally incapacitated because of the religious virus that goes out. Spirituality is the key Spirituality will give you enlightenment, will open your eyes to see things in different ways. It will give you inspiration, motivation, aspirations. It will allow you to be your true honored self. It will allow you to grow to be the person you truly can be. It will allow you to be born again many times, not by dumping water over your head in a pool or having somebody smash your head into the ocean. That's not being born again. That's not a baptism. The baptism is a baptism of consciousness. When you finally awaken to the point where you grow consciously to a higher level and you can look back at your previous level and look down on it and realize where you came from, you have just realized you've been born again. And you'll be born again many times in one lifetime if you continue to study, practice, work, and ascend. You see? This is what being born again is all about. Not having some pastor or some clergyman take your baby and douse them in this water, and all this other kind of crazy stuff. That's not doing anything. Oh, you know what that's doing? That's putting H2O, which is a molecule, all over your baby, and that water might have some bacteria in it. Give your baby a doggone flu. The best thing you can do is teach your kid from the time it's little all the way up to be a free thinker, to ask questions, and to follow spirituality. Then you won't have to worry about dumping your baby's head in that water. Now, let's take a look at some text. Sumerian Tablets versus Bible parallels, okay? You can see this Bible here in the background. You see the Sumerian Tablets. Like I said, there's so much here. I'm going to do it in stages because there's just so much. And I don't have a lot of time tonight because I have so much stuff that I'm working on. I got a long night ahead of me. And but however, how does the ancient Sumerians' religion differ from the Bible? Sumerian civilization was founded around 4500 BCE, before the current era, right? They wrote down their history on clay tablets, but the stories themselves were likely much older and passed down from generation to generation. We know this now for a fact because we found tablets that we thought were like the oldest, and then we kept looking and looking, and we found even older tablets with the same exact story on it. So these stories are actually tens of thousands of years old, not just 6,000 years old, right? So we're talking about a real ancient time. Another thing for me to point out is that the Sumerian civilization records start on average around 6,000 years ago, which is where the Bible got the 6,000 year creation story from. In other words, the Bible or religious zealots believe that the earth is only 6,000 years old. And the reason why is because it's plagiarized from Sumerian tablets, and the Sumerian tablets dated around 6,000 years ago. So to them, in their mind, there could be nothing older than that. And then that got passed down from generation to generation. You see how this religious virus keeps getting spread to the point where you develop an ignorance. Yes, the earth is older than 6,000 years, and you hear all these crazy things like dinosaurs didn't exist and all this kind of crazy stuff. I mean, this is why the aliens don't talk to us. The Sumerian civilization was founded. So the Sumerian history is about 5,000 years older than the Bible. The first written form of the Torah or the Old Testament of the Bible was not written until somewhere between 1,000 and 900 BCE. And so we look at one of the oldest parts or some of the oldest parts of the Torah, which ended up becoming part of the canonized Bible. Not exactly word for word, but most of it. Because the Jewish people believe in the Torah. The Jewish people don't believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and that the Messiah has not returned. In case you didn't know, the Jews do not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and they believe that the Messiah has not been here, has not come yet. In other words, the prophecy has not been fulfilled yet. And in the Old Testament, majority of that, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from the Torah. And the Torah copied their information from where? Sumerian tablets. So the Sumerians, excuse me, the Sumerians were polytheists. Polytheism is a belief that worships many gods as opposed to monotheism, which is a belief in a one God system. And so we know for a fact that the Sumerians, the ancient Egyptians, and many other cultures around the world who had their information plagiarized into the canonized Bible were polytheists. They believed in a multiple God system, whereas in Christianity, it became the one God system. Now, there was a situation that happened in Egypt a very long time ago. Pharaoh Akhenaten. Pharaoh Akhenaten is King Tut's father. And so Nefertiti's husband. Nefertiti was King Tut's stepmother, wasn't really his birth mother. Never could really find out what happened to King Tut's actual mom, but I keep looking and looking and looking. But either way, Akhenaten had began to worship Amen, Amun-Ra. Now, Amen told him, listen, there's only one God but me. I want nobody worshiping any of these other gods who actually were his relatives. These are the Anunnaki Atlantean people that were ruling over the lands all over the world. The Atlantean civilization was a global civilization. And he said, you know what? I want you, and I'm going to take this down for a second while I'm talking. He says, you know what? I want you to begin to force everyone to worship me and give thanks to me. Okay, this is Amun-Ra. And so Akhenaten is like, well, what will you have me do, my Lord? And so he says, the first thing I want you to do is I want you to begin to deface any of the gods that you find around any of the kingdoms. And so if you go to Egypt, like I just took a whole team of 70 people, a crew of 70 people with me to Egypt in October last year. I played the highlight video here many, many times. It was a great, great tour. I was the tour guide there. Everywhere we went, what did we see? The faces and the bodies of the ancient Egyptian gods chiseled away. Under the order of who? Pharaoh Akhenaten. The beginning of the monotheistic era that he was trying to usher in, and he had amassed a huge following of people that were on board with him. This is where the Bible stole the information for the mass exodus. So Akhenaten then eventually pisses off a lot of people throughout Egypt. A lot of these other polytricksters and other big name people were like, we got to get this guy the heck out of here. They force him out. And when he leaves, he takes with him a huge mass following of people. That was the exodus out of Egypt. Why did the new Pharaoh chase him down, or the new king who was temporarily put in charge chase him down? Well, because he had taken the Ark of the Covenant out of the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid at Giza. And that was part of their power source. When he crossed the Sea of Reeds, not the Red Sea, he crossed the Sea of Reeds, a much smaller, easier to cross, and closer sea. That's where the water came crushing back. Now, when you read into the geological studies and look at that region like I've done on the planet, you'll discover that we can do a geological rewind of that area. And when you do a geological rewind based on computer simulation, we discover that there, around that same time frame, there was actually a massive tsunami in that region. What does a tsunami do? It sucks all the water out into dry land. And then what happens when a little while later, the water comes crashing back? Yeah, and so that is the story. So Moses, in my personal opinion, most likely was Pharaoh Akhenaten, who took the people with him. There were no slaves in Egypt. Let me repeat this again. Not slaves of people's homes, but slaves building pyramids. Let me rephrase that. There were no slaves building the pyramids in Egypt. We know this for a fact because the temples in the Giza Plateau region, we found all the actual tablets in there that talk about the workers. It talks about how much they were paid, and it talks about their medical benefits. It talks about arms that were broken, legs that were broken, people that needed medical help, medical assistance. You don't do that for slaves. You don't pay slaves. These people were not slaves, okay? They were not slaves. So, pretty interesting stuff. He had amassed a huge following of people to go into the monotheistic mindset, the one God religion, which is very, very important. He ends up migrating out of there. And, you know, you find out that he ends up in Kush, the people of the black land, the black people. He ends up getting a new wife down there and creating that whole civilization down there. Pretty interesting stuff. The Enuma Elish. Let's go into this for a second here. When in the height, heaven was not named, and in the earth beneath did not bear a name. And the primeval Apsu, that's the waters. who begat them, and the chaos, Tiamat, the mother of them both. Their waters were mingled together, and no field were formed, no marsh was to be seen. When the gods, none had been called into being. You see how they talk? They talk like Yoda from Star Trek. Now you know where George Lucas got Yoda's dialect from. He got it from the Sumerian Tablets. And no field was formed, no marsh to be seen. When the gods, none had been called into being, and none bore a name, and no destinies were ordained. Then were created in God's midst of heaven, Lamu and Lahamu were called into being. Earth and we're talking about, the moon and another planet. So Mars. And so we're talking about here this Tiamat, which actually was destroyed in the Enuma Elish. And the water, it was a water-bearing planet, and the waters from Tiamat then became the separated waters from the waters, which made that into biblical text. And a new Earth coalesced, or Earth actually coalesced. Earth was actually a chunk of Tiamat. Earth was a part of this broken off piece that flew away from Tiamat and recoalesced with the waters that were already there, the organic material for life and everything else. It recoalesced as a planet, taking the third position of the sun, as Tiamat became the asteroid belt going around the sun. The asteroid belt is Tiamat, the ancient, broken, destroyed planet through two planets colliding together. If you read the Enuma Elish, it also talks about the fact that because of that situation, Mars was formed. Mars used to be an actual moon of Tiamat, but it was slung into a very strange elliptical orbit around our sun. And when you look at Mars, you see one side is charred and the other side is smooth. Why is that? Because the side that was facing Tiamat, when it blew up, a lot of that debris hit Mars and charred that side. And it also made it shift its pole of the crust about 45 degrees. More evidence that Mars used to orbit Tiamat. And also, when you do a geological rewind, you find out that it used to orbit closer into the sun and that it was probably orbiting Tiamat itself. And then the moon, it talks about the fact that the moon was tugged away, when you dig into the text, gravitationally with a huge chunk that recoalesced as Earth. The moon, according to the Enuma Elish, I have to say it that way so they don't take my video away. According to the Enuma Elish, the moon that we have did not come from a collision between Earth and a gigantic asteroid or comet. It came from orbit around Tiamat. As Tiamat was destroyed and became the asteroid belt, the moon, which we call our moon now, was tugged gravitationally along with this huge chunk that recoalesced as the planet Earth. But what's interesting is this whole text right here is pretty much almost identical in the book of Genesis. If you open up the book of Genesis and begin to read the creation story, you begin to see this virtual story without the moon and Mars, but the rest of it, you'll see it there. The Enuma Elish resembles a few parts of the Bible, especially Genesis 1, both being the temporal clauses. When above and in the beginning, in the ancient world, the sea was associated with chaos and destruction. The Bible includes a number of texts which God battles and tames the chaotic sea, like Marduk. Who is Marduk, by the way? Marduk is Amun-Ra. Okay, that's who Amun-Ra is. Battling Tiamat. Tiamat's the planet that exploded. Who embodies the sea? In Genesis 1, God is already superior to the deep, which Hebrew, Tinom, the word's related to Tiamat. So we know in the Bible or in Hebrew that Tihom, is Tiamat. So Tiamat is mentioned in the Sumerian Tablets, but it's also mentioned in the Bible as Tihom, which is the same name, but the same word. It translates the same as Tiamat. So we know that the reference of the Bible to this creation story in the very beginning, the tumultuous creation of Earth, is coming from the same exact source, which is thousands of years older than the Bible itself. Rather than creating out of nothing, both God and Marduk create by giving order to chaos. Marduk, why Marduk? Why is his name in there? Well, the original name is not Marduk in the original version of the Enuma Elish. If you look at the older tablet, which was discovered later, you find out that Marduk was not the name on the older tablet. It was Nibiru. And when Marduk was ruling over the earth, Amun-Ra, he decided to change the name of Nibiru to Marduk in a newer tablet, still thousands of years old, but not as old as the super ancient tablet that was discovered, right? Which for Marduk means creating out of Tiamat's corpse. In other words, Tiamat had been destroyed, and so now he's going to use that destroyed, all that debris to create planets and stuff in the solar system. Both God and Marduk separate primordial waters and place a barrier between the upper and lower waters. If you read the Bible, you'll see that's exact text. Both create luminaries to give light. Genesis 1 occurs over 7 days, and the Enuma Elish is told across 7 tablets. Do you see the similarities here? Do you think that's a coincidence? You see, somebody took the story from the ancient tablet and they began to remix a little bit, freelance a little bit. You see what I'm saying? Pretty interesting. Then he says, on the 6th day, God creates humans, which Marduk does in the 6th tablet of the Enuma Elish. No, listen, there's no coincidences. While God marks humans as special by making them in God's image, Marduk has man created from the blood of a slain God. God orders humans to work and care for the earth. Marduk assigns work for the gods to humans, and so the gods can rest. So basically, it's the same exact story. Finally, both the Enuma Elish and the Bible, right, include stories about the founding of Babylon, which is Babel in Hebrew, including the building of a tower or ziggurat, which I talk about many times in many of my clips, the Tower of Babel incident, which comes out of the Sumerian Tablets. But while Marduk names the city Babili, which means the gate of the gods, the Bible calls it the Tower of Babel or the city of Babel in Hebrew, which means to confuse. And we do know that at the Tower of Babel situation where God comes back, who actually was, it was actually Yahweh, who was actually Enlil in the ancient tablets. He comes back and sees that the humans are building this tower, and he realizes that, wow, they can do whatever they set their heart to do. That text actually made it into the Bible as well. And so he says, man's years shall be 120. So he had limited our years, which means a genetic modification, not letting us live too long. Because if we live too long, we get too smart. And if we get too smart, we realize we don't need to be working for these people. We can do everything ourselves. It's almost like AI becoming awakened. And so he destroys the tower, and then he separates the people, and he changes all of our languages so we can't communicate. That's why you have a lot of different languages on Earth right now, so that we can't communicate and collaborate and network as easy as we could. And that created a divide and conquer tactic, one of the very first incredible divide and conquer tactics that still works today. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Before the creation of heaven and earth, there was a void. Genesis states that the earth was unformed and void, with darkness over the surface and of the deep, and a wind from God over the water. Though not exactly the same, it implies a similar meaning to the introduction idea of the united heaven and earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh says the same thing. In Genesis, God existed before the heavens and the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh's introduction is entirely clear about the God, is not entirely clear about the gods who existed before the separation of heaven and earth, but we know that they did exist because they talk about them all the time. So we know that the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a huge story, and out of that huge story, which predates the Bible by thousands of years, you get the story of Noah's Ark, which is a tiny fraction of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is taught in universities all over the world in ancient civilizations. Okay. When I took my course at Harvard University in ancient civilizations, you have to study, you have to know information about the Epic of Gilgamesh. Eridu Genesis and the Great Flood. In the Sumerian version of the flood story, the gods decide to destroy the human civilization. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods decide to destroy humankind because they are being too noisy while the gods are trying to sleep. Excuse me, the asthma's acting up. But in the Eridu Genesis, they lack a clear explanation as to why they're really doing this destruction. It's just saying that, look, there's a flood coming. Enki, betraying the other gods, tells the protagonist Ziusudra. Ziusudra in the ancient Sumerian tablets is actually Noah in the Bible, of his plan and how to avoid dying in the flood. He instructs him to build an ark. And we found the actual ark tablet. This ark tablet is a real tablet. It was discovered only about 4 or 5 years ago. And this ark tablet is a description of how to build the ark. And the ark was not like the one described in the Bible, which it leads to more freelancing again. The ark was described to be had built as a round ship or submersible, and it had corridors in there. And the instructions were not to take two ants, and two praying mantises, and two lions, and two sheep, and two elephants, and all the animals from all around the planet onto this boat, onto this round submersible. The instructions were to collect samples from your local area of your plant flora, seed, and so forth from around the local area, and some of your local livestock. That's it. Not this fairy tale that they've been teaching you in Bible study since forever. You had two cockroaches come on the thing, and you had two puppies of every type and all this other kind of crazy stuff. No, that didn't happen. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to bust your bubble, but that never happened. Okay. Ziusudra versus Noah. Genesis is a monotheistic, book. Both Ziusudra and Noah are instructed by one God to build an ark and escape the flood. But the decision to destroy humanity is made by one and one only God. So in Genesis, you have the Abrahamic religions who believe only one God exists. Multiple gods decide to destroy the earth in the polytheistic Genesis. Now, when you read the Sumerian Tablets, you find not only in Genesis, but in other tablets as well, that these gods had collaborated together and that some of them did not want the earth to be destroyed. And they were begging to the leaders, Enki and Enlil, primarily Enlil, who had full control in decision-making, and also Anu, their father, begging to them to please not let this calamity happen. And they decided that, you know what, the experiment here had gone wrong. The people had gotten too noisy. They had gotten too wild and crazy. They had gotten too intelligent. We want to just start over. And while this flood, which seems like a directed asteroid strike, while this flood, through whatever method they used, swept over the land and turned all the kingdoms into mud, they actually were on this sky ship crying and weeping, then loathing that their creation had been destroyed. This is in Sumerian Tablets. Pretty interesting stuff. Noah and his family remained human. Okay, let me read this first. Hold on. Okay, yeah. So Noah and his family remain human. After the flood, both Ziusudra and Noah are blessed by their gods, but in different ways. Ziusudra becomes immortal. So in the Sumerian Tablets, the gods grant Ziusudra immortality by giving him some type of genetic mutation, allowing him to live an extended lifespan. Not necessarily immortal for eternity, but an extended lifespan. In other words, more than the 120 years. And when you look at it, then you see that Noah and his family remain mortal in the Bible version, right? In the book of Genesis, God establishes a covenant with humankind, promising to never destroy them again. The promise that God makes to Noah sets Abrahamic religion far apart from Mesopotamian polytheism. The Mesopotamians believed that they had to constantly keep the gods happy, or else they would wreak havoc upon the earth, even when all their efforts, so forth and so on, were being met and unpredictable. So what happens here is you see, and let me pause from here and go back full screen. This is another good example of something I was talking about earlier when we first started this podcast. The fact that the illusion in the biblical text that, we saved your family and everything's going to be all good. But if you look at the story after the family's been saved and they're starting fresh again, right? It also says in the Bible that not everybody died. It also says in the Sumerian text, not everybody died. So Noah and his family were not the only people left. Read it good. Read your good book good. I know the book like the back of my hand. I know the book like the back of my hand. There were giants that survived. The Anunnaki, they call them the Anak. They survived the Great Flood. And there were other people that also survived the Great Flood. So pretty interesting. So it wasn't just Noah's family. Now, here is where it gets really important. You have to understand through genetics. Noah's family did not have enough genetic diversity to repopulate the earth. Think about that. I want you to go and think about your initial family, you, your wife, your kids, and just with your own mind, think about this for a second. Think about your job now has been issued to you to repopulate the entire planet from this small genetic pool. What do you think is going to happen after y'all start having sex with each other? You're going to have a whole bunch of disabled people walking around with deformities, mental illness, right? You can't even go past the second or third generation doing that before everything falls apart. You definitely ain't going to create 8 billion people from that small genetic pool. Just like Adam and Eve did not create 8 billion people. 2 people did not create 8 billion. There were people here already. Adam and Eve was just 2 of many that already had existed. You see? This is basic bare bones biology, like biology 101. Like if you go to university and tells on your test, they ask you a question on your test, if you can mate with your brother and sister and create 8 billion people, and you put yes, you fail that class. You fail. And I dare you to try it in real life and see what happened. Right? So we got to start thinking more logically. The thing that happened after Noah's family survived, they met other people, other survivors. They built a new civilization. They kickstarted another civilization in that region of the planet. Other people were thriving in other parts of the world. But what's interesting is they go right back into the same old ritualistic things, trying to keep God happy, trying to satisfy God all the time by having sacrifices and this and that. They went back right into the same old system again. So even though the biblical text is trying to say that, hey, they just, they were blessed and they could start fresh again, not true. It's the same as the Sumerian version where they had to keep trying to keep the gods happy through sacrifices nonstop. You see? Rigor 49er. So are the Anunnaki and the Nephilim the same? They are absolutely the same, people. All right. Oops, I'm clicking the wrong button here somewhere. All right, there we go. All right, so let me go back in here again. Now we're going to get into the debates. The debates are a very important text. Thank you, T. Wells. I appreciate you. Oh, yeah, you're going to be going to Egypt with us as soon as your boys are old enough. That's going to be great because I'm going to keep on going nonstop like I've always been doing. Since 2014, I've been going nonstop, and I'm looking forward to having you guys with us. So the debates is a text. It's a text that tells you the Cain and Abel story before Cain and Abel even existed, okay? It tells you the Cain and Abel story. It reads it a little slightly differently, but it's the same exact story. The debate between the sheep and grain describes the primordial hill where the gods live. An, who's also Anu, right? The sky god creates 2 sisters, Ashan and the goddesses of the sheep, and Lahar, the goddess of grain. An creates these goddesses to clothe and feed all the gods and goddesses on the primordial hill, but they realize that they do not understand how to use their sisters' gifts, so they created man to feed and clothe the gods instead. Later, Ashnan and Lahar fight over which sister has the more meaningful gift. The story ends with the gods, Enki and Enlil, intervening in the debate and declaring Ashnan the winner. The similar story between, from the biblical text is the debate between Sumer and Winter. The gods create Emesh, Sumer for vegetation and the abundance of the earth. Aten, Emesh's brother, identified with Winter, was responsible for the fertility of livestock. When the brothers fight, Enlil declares Emesh the more important of the 2, and they reconcile after Enlil's ruling. The same Cain and Abel story over and over again, right? The 2 debates discussed above bear the most striking resemblance to the Genesis story of Cain and Abel, Genesis 4:1 through 4:16. Like the debates, the story of Cain and Abel involves quarreling siblings, but while the debate tablets discuss relatively insignificant events, the story of Cain and Abel is amongst the most tragic tales in the Bible, one of the very first recorded murders, right? When God appreciates Abel's offerings but not Cain's, Cain becomes jealous and angry. God warns Cain not to give in to his anger, but Cain does not listen and kills his brother Abel in envious rage. God punishes Cain by cursing him to wander ceaselessly. Now, what does he do? God tells Cain, you got to get out of here. And Cain goes, in the Bible, he says, but the people out there will kill me. So wait a minute. If you believe in the version that most people believe in of the Bible, you know that there's Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel. So now there's Adam, Eve, and Cain. Now Cain gets kicked out of the garden, but all of a sudden he knows that there's people out there. What people? That's in the Bible. There were millions of people already here. When Adam and Eve arrived here, there were already people here. Adam and Eve were not the first people on this planet. They were the first Homo sapiens sapien version, the first genetically modified by the Inu, by the Anunnaki, to be able to reproduce in a certain type of way. The other people, a lot of them weren't able to reproduce in that way. And the ones who were creating a lot of rarities, giants that didn't have long lifespan. All kind of crazy stuff was going on according to these texts. But when you look at the story of the Adamu, when Isis says, I'm going to take this baby to term and I'm going to bring forth the first one that works the proper way. And she takes one of the existing hominids, which was our cousins on this planet, takes the egg out of her womb and puts it into her own womb and takes it to term for 10 months. And then she gives birth to the Adamu, which means first man. That was Adam. It means that he was the first perfectly created man that can actually reproduce on his own, that had enough common sense and logic and wisdom and understanding to take orders, but also to think for himself. And then they tried to mate him with some of the other people that were there, and the mating wasn't working. So then they took some more genetic material from him, and then they cloned or recreated an Eve and had them mate. When they figured out that worked and they can have a baby, then they duplicated that experiment over and over and over again. They made a lot of Adams through the same process. Not Adam having babies with Eve, but them creating new Adams and new Eves and having them live in this Eden, Edin, which was located in Mesopotamia, which is now modern day Iraq, according to the tablets, not according to Billy Carson. And in this mating area, they had certain specific times they could and couldn't mate. And if you violated that, you would be punished. So they were cattle. They were like cattle. And that's why when Enki comes and sneaks up into the garden and starts giving them knowledge, that was the snake. And Lil comes back and discovered that they had to gain some knowledge about themselves and realized that they weren't animals, that they were sentient beings. He gets pissed off and calls his brother a snake in the tablets, you see? Unlike the debate between Sumer and Winter, Cain and Abel do not reconcile. It is a story that teaches us about the consequences of our actions, human fallibility, and so forth and so on. So basically, it's a remix of ancient stories. All this is remixed stuff, you see? So we do a little comparison since we're wrapping up part one of a 4-part series. The Sumerian Tablets. The oldest tablet recorded dates back to around 2300 BCE, but the story is likely much, much older. We're talking about tens of thousands of years old because now we have found tablets that are much older than 2300 BCE, okay? It's polytheistic, multiple gods, has many recorded creation stories that are often incomplete because of broken tablets and such. But ironically, the parts that weren't broken make it into the Bible. Interesting. Then you have the Sumerian tradition, which includes the Great Flood story, Eridu Genesis. Ziusudra is rewarded with eternal life. The Sumerians wrote many debate stories called disputations, which mimic Cain and Abel's story. And you look at the book of Genesis, their side-by-side comparison. You see the comparisons there. You see the slight remixing going on. You see that the text that made it into that part of Genesis was mostly just plagiarized text from ancient tablets, which then were slightly remixed in some cases, but ultimately come from ancient text. Very important stuff. Very, very important stuff. And so why is it important to know this? Because it's important to know and understand who you are and where you came from, how we got here, and what happened in the ancient past. Because until we find out what really happened in the ancient past, we can't plan for a better future, because the past is prologue. We're in a loop. This stuff keeps happening over and over and over again. We keep going through this vicious cycle of rise and fall of civilizations. We keep going through this vicious cycle of situations that happened in the past reappearing on our timeline and happening over and over again. See, if you go back in time to 2023 BCE, you'll find the same exact stuff we're going through now happening back then. Not necessarily with the technology level, but with the social issues. You'll find it. Every section, every era of time that you have in our current era, match and go back and study history for that previous area in BCE, you'll find the same stuff happening. It's like we're in a time loop. We keep doing it over and over and over and over again. Until we understand and know this kind of stuff, until we dig deep into the information that we've been fed and forced to analyze it, break it apart, rip it apart, and put it back together again, until then, we'll continue to go through this vicious cycle of rise and fall of civilizations, rise and fall of awareness and knowledge and ascension and wisdom. We'll keep getting to a certain point and falling right back down again. At some point, we got to learn how to walk, and then we got to learn how to run. You see? Thank you, Big Fire Gaming. I appreciate you. It's this big cycle, you know. He says, let me see what he says here. What happened to the Anunnaki? Why are they gone now? Good question. The Anunnaki actually are not gone. They're still here. If you look at the text, you discover there was a second pyramid war which occurred between Amun-Ra and his relatives. Some fled and some stayed. They actually dropped what they called, listen to this, weapons of mass destruction on this planet. WMDs. Yeah, in ancient times. You thought George Bush Jr. came up with that term for the Iraq War? Where do you think he got it from? The tablets. And in this dropping of these weapons, it created something called an evil wind in the text. And then this evil wind, whoever was in it, where this evil wind was moving, we're talking about nuclear fallout of some type, radiation fallout. People's fingernails were falling off. Their hair was falling out. Their nose and eyes were bleeding. This is all symbols. Their skin was boiling. This is all signs of radiation sickness. And when you look at the region that it was talked about being dropped in, you find the Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Valley. You find the Giza Plateau and many other areas around the region where sand and buildings were vitrified and turned into glass. Matter of fact, in the Indus Valley, bodies are still laying in the street. Google Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro. You'll see bodies laying in the street, holding hands, just the skeletons that have never, ever, ever been eaten by any wild animals because they're radiated. So we know that there was a nuclear war of some type in the ancient past. In this text, some of these beings fled to safe areas and some left. The ones that stayed continue to mate with humans and create offspring, and their ancestors and their bloodline is walking amongst us this very day. So in some ways, genetically, they never left. And all of us, including every single human on this planet, has a little touch of that DNA in our body. Any Homo sapiens sapien has a little slight touch of that DNA in our body. So in essence, we're all here. Now, I believe that they're watching us through the Black Knight satellite. That's why I wrote that documentary, The Black Knight Satellite, on Beyond the Signal. They're watching us and they're monitoring us to see how far we're going to go and if we're going to become a rival of them. So pretty interesting stuff. Terrence Tech says, hey, Billy, what's a great book for the etymological words of the Bible in Hebrew, Aramaic scriptures? That's good. A great question. I have these books that break all the words down. And you can actually look up the breakdown of these words. You don't even have to buy a book. You can look them up on Google and you can get the breakdown of the words all the way going back into the original text. And what I'll do is I'll make a special video with that and I'll do a demonstration online of how to do it. And I'll show you guys exactly how it's done, how to break down all the words. Thank you for coming on tonight. I'm going to do this whole thing again. I'm going to continue to do these. This one topic, was the Bible copied from ancient texts. And I'm going to break it into 4. So I got 3 more episodes to go covering these texts. And I'm going to continue to show you, like I did tonight, side by side, verse by verse, the difference between the Sumerian text and now as I get further into it, you're going to see other texts, not just Sumerian. It'll be integrated with so many others. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is really the Egyptian Book of Going Forth by Day, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Mahabharata, the Vedas. We're going to get into all these different texts, and I'm going to start breaking down to you where a lot of this information came from, as well as, of course, the Emerald Tablets, which is a lot of the New Testament there. So it's going to be amazing, and I want you guys to learn. And, of course, I always bring the receipts and tell you my sources. That way, you can go research for yourself. That's the most important thing. We want everybody to become their own researcher, not just have me sitting up here telling you everything, and then you're sitting up there going, yeah, that's what he said. Oh no, I want you to research. I want you to learn. See, the difference between me and the other people out there in terms of religious sects, they don't want you to go out and become the deeper knowledge person because they need to be the one with all the information that you come to give your money to. See, me, I want you to go out there and learn. I want you to become a better person. I want you to become wiser. See, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But when the teacher is ready, the master will appear. And you're all three. You're the student, the teacher, and eventually you have the right and the willpower to become the master. And you can all do it. You can all do it. And forbidden knowledge will become common knowledge. And when forbidden knowledge becomes common knowledge, that means we're in the golden age. And that's where we're headed. Period, point blank. All right.
Spiritual News Television. AA Creation 911.